Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to the second part of our two-part series about crimes involving collectibles. If you haven't seen part 1, be sure to check that out as well. We'll leave a link in the description below. As always, if you enjoy our videos, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel. With that out of the way, here is part 2 of 2 crimes involving collectibles. Before we get into the main part of the video, I just wanted to share a little bit about my own personal interest in today's topic. Like many kids who grew up in the 1990s, I was totally swept up in the original wave of Pokemon fever. I got into the Game Boy games first, and by the time the trading card game was released in English between 1998 and 1999, I was totally hooked. And while I have more fond memories about Pokemon and that time period than I can ever possibly count, I also remember that Pokemania was one of the first times in my life that I also became aware that there was a dark side to these kinds of hobbies as well. That these collectibles had a powerful enough hold on us kids due to their value and popularity that some people would make terrible choices to get their hands on them. In fact, it was one of those incidents that would ultimately get Pokemon cards banned from most, if not all, schools where I grew up. At the time, all I remember hearing is rumors that someone had been attacked for their cards, and because of it, schools weren't allowing us to bring them anymore due to concerns over safety. Needless to say, as kids, we viewed this as more of an inconvenience than something to seriously worry about. We were just annoyed that we wouldn't be able to trade and play with our cards on the playground anymore. It wasn't until years later that I decided to look up the story that we had been told to see what, if anything, actually happened. It turned out that in October of 1999, a 14-year-old boy in the city of Laval, Quebec, was stabbed while trying to recover his younger brother's Pokemon cards. When he confronted the 12-year-old at school who had supposedly taken his brother's cards, the alleged thief stabbed him in the shoulder, inflicting an injury that required several stitches. The 12-year-old was suspended, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to find out in the newspaper record if the kid was ever charged over the stabbing. All of this is to say that I was well aware that violent incidents had occurred involving young people in Pokemon cards before I started doing the research for today's video. However, nothing I had ever read before about the subject remotely compares to the case we're about to share with you today. In the spring of 2000, it seemed that 12-year-old Jerry Lee Alley Jr. had finally started to find his footing at C.H. Price Middle School. The school was located in Interlaken, Florida, a small, quiet town of about 1,500 people, where Jerry had moved with his younger brother and his grandparents, Marvin and Ann, after they had adopted the boys to raise as their own. Those close to Jerry knew him as a kind, friendly, and happy boy, whose hard-working attitude was recognized and appreciated by his grandparents and his teachers. In February of that year, Jerry had been named the Student of the Month at school, and a couple of months later, he had earned a Most Improved Award for his diligent practice of the flute in the school band. Like most boys his age, Jerry enjoyed playing Nintendo and riding his prized red and black bicycle around the neighborhood. He had even started to take an interest in learning how to do bicycle repair, and had bonded with his grandfather Marvin over weekend trips to local yard sales to look for good deals on parts that he could use. And of course, like many kids at the time, Jerry was also into the Pokemon trading card game, having started a decent-sized collection of his own that he would sometimes carry around with him in his backpack. Despite all these positive traits, Jerry didn't always have the easiest time when it came to other kids at school. He was small for a 6th grader, and this, combined with his gentle demeanor, often made him a target for school bullies. However, that spring, things had started to change when he made friends with a 15-year-old 8th grader named John Anthony Silva. Unlike some of the other older kids at the middle school, John reportedly stuck up for Jerry when others would pick on him or call him names. He also rode on the same bus to school as Jerry, and the two of them eventually started talking because of a shared interest in a video game. The friendship furthered when the two boys discovered that they were both collecting Pokemon cards. In addition to joining a club based around the hobby at school, soon they were meeting up regularly in each other's neighborhoods to hang out, ride bikes, and trade cards. The afternoon of May 26, 2000, started out like any other Friday for Jerry. After arriving home from school, he hopped on his bike, backpack slung across his shoulder, and rode off into the neighborhood, promising to be home by dinner. However, his 6 p.m. curfew soon came and went, and there was still no sign of him. Immediately, Jerry's grandfather, Marvin, sensed something was wrong and hopped into his truck to search the surrounding area. He talked to the 6th graders' friends, but none of them offered any helpful information. Marvin even stopped at John's house twice to make sure he was absolutely sure they hadn't been hanging out together, but he said that he hadn't seen Jerry that afternoon. When the sun went down and Jerry still had yet to make an appearance at home, Marvin frantically called the police. Without wasting any time, the Putnam County Sheriff's Department launched an air and ground search for Jerry. Volunteers and police dogs were brought in to aid the ground search, and flyers were made up with Jerry's school picture. Still, the effort failed to locate the missing boy that first night. As the next couple of days passed, search teams continued to scour every area of the town and surrounding area they could think of. Locals, meanwhile, began to fear the worst. Perhaps some kind of stranger or predator from out of town was responsible for the disappearance, they thought. On the second night after Jerry went missing, an Interlaken resident named Dawn Bachman had a strange dream. She saw a boy sitting in an abandoned concrete septic tank. In the dream, it looked like he was playing. It wasn't until the next day, when Dawn saw one of the missing persons flyers for Jerry Alley at the grocery store, that she realized that he was the boy that she had seen in her dream. Though she didn't know him, she thought she recognized the place that she had been dreaming about. It was a vacant lot, located off a dirt road about 2 miles away from Jerry's house. The lot, which was formerly the site of a mobile home, had been abandoned after the home there had burned down about 3 years prior. Since then, the lot had become overgrown with plants and grass, and had been littered with garbage, old furniture, and broken down vehicles. Because the land sat unclaimed, it had become something of a hangout spot for kids in the area. Of particular interest to many of them was the empty concrete septic tank on the land, which was sometimes used by local kids as a fort. This lot had been visited during the ground search, of course, but apparently the existence of the septic tank was not as well known to adults in the area as it was to the kids. As a result, no one had noticed that the entrance to the tank had been deliberately covered up with pieces of wood. Though she knew that she would probably come off as either weird or guilty, following her dream, Dawn decided to make a trip to the vacant lot to investigate. When she arrived, she flagged down a nearby volunteer firefighter and asked him if he would help her take a look around. When the firefighter removed the wood that was blocking the entrance to the septic tank, he was horrified by what he saw. Inside the tank was the lifeless body of Jerry Alley. His legs and hands had been bound with an elastic bandage used to apply pressure to muscle sprains, and another length of bandage had been wrapped around his neck along with an electrical cord. He had been strangled to death. Alongside Jerry's body were his missing backpack and bicycle, as well as a chilling note written on a single sheet of lined paper. The note seemed to have been left by the killer, and appeared to be some sort of disturbing checklist for carrying out the crime. Written in a childlike scrawl and riddled with misspellings, it was titled "List to Prepare Jerry," and went on to list items such as wrap in tower, assumed by investigators to mean wrap in towel, tie up hands, and finally, cover eyes. Though the discovery of Jerry's body came as a devastating blow to his family and the local community, Things were only about to get worse when just one day later, police arrested his supposed friend, John Anthony Silva, for the horrible crime. It turned out that even before this point, police had already started to suspect that John was involved in Jerry's disappearance. Multiple witnesses had pinpointed John's house as the last place that Jerry had been seen alive, and had also shared other pieces of potentially incriminating information about his behavior that day. When investigators spoke with a friend of John's sister, she recalled that after Jerry had left the Silva's house that day, John had immediately followed after him on his bicycle. She also said that he appeared to be carrying a shopping bag with some unknown items in it around the handlebars as he rode away. When John returned a little over half an hour later, she said that he appeared to be sweaty, and told she and his sister that it was none of their business when they inquired about where he had been. Later on, after Marvin had shown up at the house looking for his grandson, the girl said that they had started discussing what could have happened to Jerry, when John allegedly blurted out, quote, "All I can say is, that's a terrible way to die." Keep in mind, Jerry had only been missing for a few hours at this point. When investigators questioned John about the murder following his arrest, he initially claimed not to know anything about it. When confronted with some of the evidence in the case, he changed his story, telling them that Jerry's death had been an accident. According to John, Jerry had hit his head while the two of them were wrestling, and in a panic, he had left him and his belongings in the septic tank because he didn't know what to do. Detectives didn't buy this for a couple of reasons, the most glaring of them being that Jerry's autopsy showed no sign of a head injury. The case against John only became more damning when it was revealed that his fingerprints were on the chilling letter that had been found at the crime scene. When police compared the handwriting of the letter to other samples of John's schoolwork, they also believed that they were a match. Though John offered no outright confession during his interrogation, he eventually broke down in tears, telling detectives that he wanted Jerry's family to know that he didn't mean for this to happen. Regardless, investigators were certain that they had not only come up with enough evidence showing John's guilt, but that they had uncovered the motive behind the crime. It was for Jerry's Pokemon cards. Reports that we came across differ on the exact details, with some saying that only one of Jerry's cards remained in his backpack at the crime scene, while others say it was several. But in any case, his considerable collection was almost entirely missing. A large amount of Pokemon cards were later seized from John Silva's house, and investigators maintained that many of them were from the collection that had been taken from Jerry. Unfortunately, there was no way to definitively prove this. John was subsequently charged with first-degree murder, and the decision was made to try him as an adult for the crime. When the case went to trial in 2001, prosecutors focused on much of the evidence already mentioned above. The defense, meanwhile, attempted to attack the prosecution's timeline of the case, particularly the 30 to 35-minute window that John's sister's friend had claimed that he was missing on the day of the murder. The defense claimed that this was nowhere near enough time for the murder to have taken place. They also focused on Dawn Bachman's story about her dream, insisting that it was much more likely that she was lying, and instead knew where the body was because she was somehow involved in the crime. At the end of the trial, the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution, and John was convicted of first-degree murder, meaning that he would automatically receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It's worth pointing out here that the jury did have the option of convicting him of the lesser charges of second-degree murder or manslaughter, but opted to convict him of the most severe charge. As a rather eerie and coincidental side note related to the sentence, reports we came across mention that during the search of John's schoolwork that we previously mentioned, investigators allegedly came across an essay that he had written on the subject of juveniles who commit adult crimes. In it, John wrote that such offenders should be prosecuted as adults and that it would help them to learn a lesson. He reportedly ended the essay by saying, "If you do the crime, you should do the time." And it appears that John Silva has done just that, While searching for any recent articles about the Jerry Alley case, we came across reports that stated that in 2016, John was up for possible resentencing for his crime. This happened after a 2012 Supreme Court decision that decided that life without parole sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional. This in turn sparked a number of legal decisions about whether the 2012 decision applied retroactively or not, until in 2016, it was decided that it did. While this conceivably meant that John could have been resentenced, it appears that through yet another legal decision, the state of Florida reserved the right to use life without parole sentences for juvenile offenders, specifically if they were convicted of murder. It appears that this is still an ongoing legal battle in Florida and many other states in the U.S., but at least for the current time, based on the information we were able to find, John Silva remains incarcerated at the Everglades Correctional Institution on a life sentence. As for Jerry's family, they remain convinced that if John is released, he will kill again. They've been vocal about the issue whenever interviewed by local media. We also came across at least 2 posts online allegedly written by family members of Jerry, one of which was a 2016 Change.org petition purportedly written by his younger brother, advocating for John to remain behind bars for the rest of his life. Do you know of any other cases like this that you think we should check out? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. Thank you for watching.